The sky above Bramble Creek looked bruised, that morning, purple clouds swollen like a fist about to strike, the kind of sky that warned a soul to stay indoors. But Alara Boone had no such option. She stood in the middle of the dirt street, trembling, clutching her baby to her chest as the riders approached in a slow, heavy line. Dust curled around the hooves of their horses, men with cold eyes and guns that never seemed to miss a thing. And at the front of them rode Marlin Pike, a man whose smile looked carved from bad intentions and whiskey bitterness. He didn't rush. Men like Pike didn't need to. Ilara's hands tightened around her son, little Cal, barely 9 months old, warm and soft and unaware of the danger bearing down on them. She whispered to him, her voice shaking, "Mama's here. Mama's right here, baby." A door slammed somewhere behind her. A curtain twitched. The town watched, but no one stepped forward. No one dared get in Pike's way. He owned half the land, half the law, and all the fear. The horses halted. Pike swung down from his saddle with a sickening calm, brushing dust from his vest like he was preparing for a polite conversation. His boots thudded on the cracked street as he walked toward her. "Alara Boone," he said, voice smooth as rock. "Been looking for you." She swallowed, though her throat felt closed up. "Mr. Pike, you got my money already. I paid what I could, you paid what you could." He cut in, "But what your late husband owed." He spread his arms as though speaking to a crowd. "That debt stands tall as a church steeple." Alara stepped back, cradling Cal closer. "Please, I just need more time." Pike chuckled, low and cold. "Time's not something you've got. Debt's due today." She felt the world sway. I don't have anything left." "Oh, you do." His eyes drifted to the baby. Her heart stopped beating. "No." The word slipped out raw, small, broken. One of Pike's men dismounted and moved toward her. She staggered backward, shaking her head, tears threatening to spill. "No, please, anything else. Take the house. House ain't worth the wood it's fallin' apart in." Pike said lazily, "You owe." And he nodded at the baby, "is something somebody out west is willin' to pay nicely for. A healthy boy'll fetch more than your man ever could." The world shattered, Alara screamed, clinging to Cal as the men reached her. She clawed, kicked, but became wild enough to draw blood on one man's hand. But there were 3 of them. Cal was ripped from her arms, his sudden wail splitting her heart open. She fell to her knees as they swung back onto their horses, the baby's cries rising over the thunder of hoofbeat. Pike mounted, tipped his hat to her like he was leaving a church service, and said, "Debt settled." And then he rode off. Alara scrambled up, running after them until her legs gave out. She collapsed in the dirt, hands grasping nothing but dust. Cal's cries faded first, a sound too far away to reach, then gone entirely. The silence after was unbearable. She pushed herself upright, stumbling blindly toward the sheriff's office. But Sheriff Alden stood in the doorway, already lean, scared. "Useless. Sheriff, help me please. They took my baby. They took nothing I can do." "Miss Boone." He didn't meet her eyes. "Pike's within his rights, far as the papers read. Best you accept it." "Accept it?" Her voice broke into a scream. "He stole my child." But Alden backed away, muttering something about not wanting trouble. The townsfolk melted back into their homes, shutters closing like eyelids, refusing to watch her pain. Alara felt something inside her nerve and spirit shatter. She fell to the steps, sobbing so hard it sounded like she was choking on her own breath. Her hands trembled uncontrollably. Her baby, her only family, was gone, and nobody cared. The wind picked up, scattering dust across her skirt. Somewhere, a bell tolled noon. The sound echoed through the hollow streets, ringing the truth of her loss, deep and merciless. Elara. Boone's world had ended. She just didn't know yet. Someone was riding toward Bramble Creek. Someone who had heard the crying from miles away. Someone with a past full of violence, loss, and justice carved in bone. A mountain man. And he would arrive by next noon. The saloon at the far end of Bramble Creek wasn't much, just a warped building with peeling paint and a porch that moaned like it hated being stepped on. But inside, it was loud enough to drown a man's thoughts. Clinking glasses, off-key piano notes, rough laughter, and the stink of tobacco, sweat, and someone's cheap perfume. The doors swung as Bramble Creek's cowhands trickled in for their midday drinks. Their voices tangled with talk of the storm rolling in, the price of cattle, and quietly, cautiously, the scene they had just witnessed in the street. A young woman at the bar shook her head. "Pike took her baby," she whispered. "Lord help her. Lord ain't steppin' foot in this town." An older man grumbled, spitting into a bucket. "Not with Pike runnin', it but that baby, just a tiny thing." "Debt is debt," the bartender said, but even he didn't sound convinced. Their whispers floated across the room like dust motes, and drifted toward a figure sitting alone at a table in the darkest corner. Holt Renner had come down off the mountain only because he needed supplies and because winter was creeping down the peaks with hungry claws. He didn't like towns, didn't like people, didn't like the way everyone always looked at his scars first, his size second, and his eyes last. But he listened, and he always listened when a woman cried. Holt didn't raise his head, didn't blink. He simply sat, hulking, shoulders broad under a rough fur-lined coat, dark hair falling near his eyes, beard heavy enough to hide the tension in his jaw, but his ears picked up every tremble in the saloon-goers' voices. A baby taken as payment. A mother's screams. Pike's riders thundering out of town. A storm inside him stirred. The bartender glanced toward the shadowed corner, suddenly uneasy. Not because Holt was doing anything he wasn't, but because men like him carried a quiet that promised violence if pushed. The piano faltered, a few keys ringing sour. The air shifted as if the room sensed it, to the presence of a man whose name traveled on the wind above the ridgelines, carried by hunters, trappers, and outlaws alike. One cowboy nudged his friend. "Ain't that the mountain man, Renner? Thought he died last winter. Looks alive enough to me. Heard he killed 3 wolves with nothin' but a damn hatchet. Heard he killed a whole camp of smugglers over in Cold Hollow. Left one alive so he could tell the story." Holt ignored all of it. Men like to talk. Let them, but when a trembling old prospector muttered, "Poor Miss B, she'll never see that boy again," Holt's fingers curled slowly around his drink. The movement was small, barely noticeable, but anyone who knew Holt, Renner, anyone who had ever seen the look in his eyes when injustice slicked the ground, Red would have felt the shift. After a long moment, he rose. The chair creaked in relief as he stood to his full height, towering, broad, imposing. Conversations died midst, even the card players at the back quieted. Sensing something heavy and dangerous in the air, Holt stepped up to the bar, boots thudding like distant thunder. "Who took the child?" he asked. No greeting, no warm-up, just the question. The bartender swallowed. "Marlin Pike. Rode off with the baby not an hour ago." Where? Holt's voice was gravel dragged over stone. "His compound, west of here, I'd wager, or maybe the Outlaw Trail. Heard he's been selling goods, livestock included, to a camp up near Blood Ridge." The room tensed. Blood Ridge was not a place men mentioned. Casually, Holt dropped a coin on the counter. He didn't take another drink. He didn't ask another question. He simply turned toward the door. But as he pushed it open, a thin voice behind him stopped the entire saloon cold. A farmhand whispered, "Why do you care, Renner?" Holt paused in the doorway, half shadow, half storm. For a moment, the saloon became silent as a church at midnight. Holt didn't look back. He just said, low and rough, "Because a baby don't pay a debt." Then he walked out into the dying light. The wind caught the door behind him, slamming it shut, and every soul inside shivered, some from fear, some from hope they were afraid to admit. Somewhere across town, Elara Boone was still on her knees in the dust, her tears dried but her spirit broken. But a mountain man had heard the story. And Holt Renner never ignored a mother's cry. Elara Boone couldn't remember how long she'd been sitting on the splintered steps of the sheriff's office. Minutes, hours maybe, only seconds. Time didn't move right when your world had been cut open and left to bleed. Her hands were numb, curled in her lap like they didn't belong to her anymore. Her throat felt scraped raw from screaming. Her dress was streaked with dust and tears. But none of that mattered. Only one thing mattered. Cal, her baby. Her little boy who still couldn't say mama, but knew the sound of her heartbeat when he slept. She staggered to her feet. Her legs trembled like she was trying to stand on river stones, but she forced herself upright and limped down the street toward her home, a tiny shack of a place that looked smaller, emptier, and crueler than ever. Inside, the silence hit her like a slap. Cal's woven cradle still sat by the corner. His little blanket was folded on the edge. The tiny wooden toy horse Sheriff Alden had carved for him sat untouched. Elara pressed both hands to her mouth, choking back a sob. Her knees buckled, but she caught herself against the table. "No," she whispered, shaking. "I'm getting him back. I'm getting him back." She tore through the house, grabbing what little she had, a threadbare coat, a canteen, half a loaf of stale bread, a $1 coin hidden beneath a floorboard. It wasn't enough, not nearly, but she shoved it all into a sack. Anyway, she didn't have a plan. Not yet, but despair had sharpened into something else, something with teeth. Desperation and a mother's fury. She stepped outside again, breathing hard, heart pounding like it wanted to escape her chest. She marched toward Pike's direction. Didn't matter if she got shot on sight. She would claw her way into that compound if she had to. She made it halfway down the street before a voice stopped her cold. "You're walking to your death, miss." She froze. Turned. A woman stood in a doorway, a laundress named Marcy, soft-faced, kind-hearted, someone who had always offered Elar scraps of work when she needed it. "Elar," Marcy whispered, stepping outside. "You can't go to Pike's men alone. They'll put a bullet in you before you even reach the gate." Elara shook her head, breath shaking. "I can't just sit here while they." Her voice broke. Marcy's eyes glistened. "I know, honey. And if the law wasn't in Pike's pocket, maybe." "It shouldn't matter what the law says," Elara snapped, fiercer than she intended. "No one has the right to take a child." Marcy swallowed hard. "I wish I could help, truly, but wishing wasn't going to get Cal back." Elara yanked her arm free and kept walking. She'd die out there. She knew it, but dying was better than living without her son. But as she reached the edge of town, dust swirling around her boots, she felt it again. A presence, a weight in the air. Then a shadow slid across the ground in front of her. A massive horse stepped into her path, dark-muscled, steaming in the cold air. Its rider sat tall in the saddle, blocking the sun. Elara backed up instinctively. She didn't recognize the man at first, didn't know anyone that big, that silent, that carved from rough wilderness. Then he dismounted. He hit the ground like a boulder dropped from a cliff, quiet, solid, unmovable. His coat was thick fur, his boots worn, his jaw shadowed. Scars traced across the side of his neck like something had once tried to tear him apart. His voice was deep enough to shake dust loose from the rafters. "You headed to Pike?" he asked. Elara blinked at him, breath-catching. "Who are you?" "Holt Renner." The name meant nothing to her, but something about the way he said it made goosebumps rise along her arms. She shook her head. "I don't need help." "Yes," Holt said simply. "You do." Anger flared hot under her skin. "I don't know you, and you don't know me." He stepped closer, not threatening, just steady. "I know grief when I see it. I know what it does to people." His gaze softened, just enough to show he wasn't made entirely of stone. "And I know Pike, I know his men. You won't make it 10 paces past their fence." Ilara's throat tightened. "I don't have a choice. They took my baby." Holt nodded once. "I heard." She looked up at him, really looked, and what she saw in his eyes wasn't pity. It was something harder, something dangerous, something that pointed itself at the men who stole her son. "Elara Boone," he said quietly, "if you want your boy back, you'll need someone who knows how Pike thinks." Tears blurred her vision. Why would you help me?" Holt didn't answer right away. He looked toward the mountains, jaw tight, as if he saw ghosts on the ridgelines. Then he said, "Because I've lost someone before, and I ain't letting it happen to another mother if I can stop it." Elara felt her breath leave her body in a rush. Hope, small and trembling, sparked inside her for the first time since Cal was taken. She swallowed, voice small. What do we do?" Holt met her eyes. "We make a plan." The late afternoon sun sagged toward the mountains, staining the sky orange and smoky red like a warning fire set along the horizon. Holt Renner led his horse toward the old barn behind Elara's property. She followed, her steps unsteady, hands still trembling, heart doing a painful stutter every time she thought of Cal's tiny fingers curling around hers. The barn wasn't much, half the boards were warped, and a cold wind hissed through the gaps, but it was private, and privacy was something Holt seemed to value more than oxygen. Inside, he dropped his pack onto a hay bale and turned to face her. "Close the door," he said quietly. Elara hesitated only a second before pushing it shut. The barn dimmed, lit only by slanted rays through the boards. Dust floated around Holt like motes suspended in the air, catching in his hair, settling on the fur of his coat. He looked like he belonged, in shadow, like the wild would always cling to him no matter how close he stood to town. "Elrod," he said, crossing his arms, "I need you to understand something before we start." She clutched her hands together, trying to steady them. This won't be easy, won't be quick. Pike's men ain't just thugs, they're organized, loyal to a fault, and meaner than wolves starved through winter. Elara swallowed but didn't look away. "I know that." He shook his head. "No, you think you know, but I've seen 'em in the mountains. They're outlaw friends up by Bloodridge. Worse, they don't trade in mercy." She flinched at the word trade. Cal was being traded like a piece of livestock. Her stomach twisted. Holt watched the grief cross her face. He lowered his arms, his voice softer but still rough like unpolished stone. "You've got grit. I can see that. Most folks would be curled on their floor right now wishing for the world to end. But that means something." Elara lifted her chin, her voice tight. "I'll walk through fire to get my son back." Holt nodded. "I'm not here to stop you. I'm here to get you through it, alive." He reached into his pack and pulled out a rough map, drawn on Hyde's handmade ink faded in places. He spread it on an overturned barrel. Elara stepped closer, her fingers twitching as she traced Pike's compound marked with crude circles. "He won't keep Cal there long," Holt said. "Baby's too valuable. He's trading with a camp north of Bloodridge, remote, hard to reach, worse to escape." Elara stared at the mark on the map, a spot deep in the wilderness. "That far. Only way he keeps a sale quiet," Holt said. "We've got a day, maybe 2, before that child leaves Pike's hands for good." Everything inside her froze. "Then we ride tonight," she whispered. Holt shook his head. "No, we leave at first light. You need rest, and I need a few hours to get you ready." He eyed her thin coat. "You got clothes warm enough for mountain cold?" She looked down at her patched skirt, her thin boots. "No, I figured." He disappeared out the barn door. When he returned, he carried a fur-lined jacket, thick wool trousers, and boots bigger than anything she had ever worn. "Take these, borrowed from a woman up north. Won't be pretty, but pretty don't matter where we're going." Elara touched the coat, surprised at its weight and warmth. "Holt, thank you." He didn't answer, just kept laying things in neat stacks, a coil of rope, 2 knives, food wrapped in cloth, a hatchet, a small tin of herbs she didn't recognize. Finally, he turned to her again. "I need to know something," he said. "Before this gets real." Her heart pinned itself to her ribs. Once we start," he said slowly, "there's no turning back. Pike will paint a target on you. Bloodridge outlaws will, too. If things go wrong, You could die out there. She steadied herself. A mother didn't have the luxury of fear. If that's the cost of saving my son, she said, voice trembling but resolute, then it's a cost I pay. Holt stared at her nod like she was fragile, but like she was a storm-gathering strength, something fierce and unstoppable, something he respected. He stepped closer, close enough that the warmth of him cut through the drafty barn air. Then we make a pact. Holt murmured, Alara's breath caught. A pact? He extended his hand. I get your son back, he said, and you follow my lead. No matter how hard it gets, you trust me when I say run. Or hide, or stay silent. She looked at his hand to hand, roughened by winter, scarred by old battles, capable of immense violence, yet offered to her with unexpected gentleness. Alara placed her hand in his. I trust you, she whispered. Holt's grip tightened around hers, not painful, as if sealing the pact with something heavier than words. First light, he said, we ride, and for the first time since her baby was taken, Alara Boone felt something other than grief. She felt the sharp, rising spark of hope. The mountains woke before the sun. Cold wind swept down the ridgelines in sharp, icy breaths, rattling pine needles and stirring the soot-blackened soil of the old burned scar. Holt Renner saddled his enormous dark horse with quiet efficiency, every movement precise, practiced like a man who had lived more years on horseback than on solid ground. Alara Boone stood nearby, bundled in the heavy coat he'd given her. It swallowed her small frame, but the warmth was a blessing. Her fingers trembled as she tightened the strap on her borrowed boots. Not from cold, fear still sat heavy in her chest, but she forced her hands steady. Holt glanced over at her. Eat, he said, nodding toward a strip of dried meat and a hard biscuit resting on a tree stump. I'm not hungry, she murmured. You will be, he said, and we've got miles to cover. There was no softness in the words, but there was concern buried under the gravel of his voice. So Alara forced herself to chew. It tasted like nothing. She barely noticed. Her mind was on Cal. His laugh, his tiny fist wrapping around her finger, the way he'd fallen asleep on her chest the night before Pike came. The thought nearly broke her. Again, but Holt interrupted before she could spiral. Mount up. He offered his arm to help her onto his horse. She stared at it for a beat. This man she barely knew, this stranger carved from wilderness and silent sand, then took it. His grip was steady, powerful, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. When he swung up behind her, the enormous horse shifted beneath them, stamping the frozen ground. Hold on, Holt said. She gripped the saddle horn. No, his voice rumbled against her back. Hold on to me. We'll be moving fast. Alara hesitated, breath-catching, but she wrapped her hands around his forearm. His coat smelled like pine smoke and cold mountain air. Then they rode. The burned forest, the hills bled into one another, climbing toward the rugged spine of the mountains. They rode through what Holt called fire country, a vast burned scar from a wildfire seasons past. Charred tree skeletons stabbed the sky. Ash clung to the soil like black snow. The land felt haunted, as if the fire still whispered under the earth. The wind picked up, carrying a strange whistle. Alara shivered. Feels like something's watching us. It is, Holt said simply. Her breath hitched. What? The mountain? The animals? The land? Everything up here's always watching. A pause. But nothing that'll touch you while I'm around. She wasn't sure why, but she believed him. Pike's scouts. By midday, the path narrowed between granite boulders. Holt slowed the horse, dropping his voice. Keep quiet. Her heart thudded painfully. What's wrong? He pointed to the ground. Hoofprints, fresh ones, leading toward Blood Ridge. Pike's scouts, Holt murmured. 2 of them, maybe 3. They're pushing hard. He scanned the horizon, muscles coiling like a predator ready to strike. They'll be looking for trouble on the ridge trail. If they find us. He didn't finish. Alara didn't need him to. What do we do? Holt tugged the reins, turning off the trail into thicker brush. We go around. Through the worst of the burn. They won't follow. She frowned. Why not? Because they're cowards, he said, and because only fools or mountain men go that way. He threw her a look. And you ain't a fool. The sky dimmed around noon as gray clouds rolled in. Holt's jaw clenched. Bet storm's coming fast. Gonna hit us hard. How bad is it? Alara asked. He didn't sugarcoat. Bad. The temperature dropped sharply, and soon snowflakes drifted down, mixing with ash until the world turned a strange, ghostly silver. Wind howled between the dead trees, making them creak like bones. Elara pressed closer against Holt's chest. His arm tightened protectively around her waist, steadying her as the horse pushed forward. Holt, she whispered over the wind. Will we make it to Cal in time? He didn't hesitate. Yes, but how can you know? Because I ain't stopping until I do. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a promise carved in stone. Nightfall by the time the storm eased. They reached a sheltered hollow where a massive fallen pine lay split in two. Holt dismounted and helped Alara down. Her legs shook, stiff from fear and cold. We'll camp here, Holt said, just for a few hours, enough for the horse to rest. He built a fire with practiced hands. Sparks floated into the dark like fireflies. Alara wrapped her coat around her and sat near the warmth. but her eyes kept drifting to Holt as he moved calm, competent, always scanning the shadows. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. Holt stopped, his expression tightening not with anger, but something older, something scarred. "Because once," he said, staring at the fire, "someone I loved needed saving." Ilara's breath stilled. "What happened?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "I got there too late." Silence stretched between them, then Holt lifted his gaze to her, stark, fierce, unyielding. "That ain't happening again. Not to your boy." Ilara felt her chest ache, not with fear, but something warmer, something dangerous. Hope and trust. She drew in a trembling breath. "When do we leave?" Holt tossed another log on the fire, the flames roaring higher. "As soon as the first star fades," he said. "We're close, Ilara." His voice dropped to a vow. "We're getting your son back." The town had gone quiet after the noon showdown, but the silence didn't bring peace. It only made the fear ring louder. By dusk, Alina sat on the edge of the cot in the spare room above the clinic, rocking little Tomas against her chest. The lamplight warmed his tiny face, and each soft breath from him felt like a miracle she wasn't sure she deserved. Downstairs, voices murmured, Doc, Hanley, and Rowan. They thought she couldn't hear, but fear sharpened her senses. "They won't let this go," Doc said, voice tight. Holt's men lost a good deal when Rowan walked out with the child. "A man like Holt doesn't take humiliation lightly," Rowan answered, low and steady. "He won't get near them, not while I'm breathing." The words wrapped around her like a blanket, warm but dangerous. She didn't want Rowan hurt, not because of her, not because of her baby. A floorboard creaked. Rowan filled the doorway a second later, massive shoulders brushing the frame. He didn't enter right away, as if waiting for her permission. A small thing, but it mattered. "You should rest," he said. "You should leave before Holt sends men after you," she whispered back, eyes lowered to Tomas. "They'll blame you for everything." "I'm not going anywhere." He said it like a man stating the weather. It made something warm and painful spark behind her ribs. Rowan finally stepped inside. He didn't sit, he rarely did, but he stood close enough that she could feel the heat of him, the scent of pine and cold air clinging to his clothes. He leaned a shoulder against the wall, watching her with that same unreadable, quiet gravity. "You think this is your fault?" he said softly. "Isn't it?" Her voice broke. "I couldn't pay the debt. I couldn't stop them. They took my baby like he was property." Her throat tightened. Tomas shifted in her arms, and she held him closer. "If you get hurt, I couldn't bear that too." Rowan studied her for a long beat. "Alina, I've been many things in my life. Pracker, hunter, loner. I know danger. I choose it." He nodded, toward Tomas. "Chose this too." Her breath caught. Chose no one had chosen her in a long time. Before she could reply, a sharp knock burst through the quiet. Doc's voice rose from downstairs. "We're closed for the night. Come back in the morning." A colder voice answered. "We ain't here for medicine." Rowan's eyes hardened instantly. He strode to the window, pulled the curtain aside a fraction, and exhaled through his nose. "Holt's riders, 3 of them." Elena's pulse hammered. "Rowan, I won't let em come up those stairs." His hand brushed her shoulder, not a caress, but a grounding touch, steady and warm. "Stay here. Keep Tomas close." She wanted to argue. She wanted to beg him to run, but Rowan had already turned, moving with silent, controlled strength toward the door. Before he left, she whispered, "Rowan, please be careful." He paused just long enough to look back. Something flickered in his eyes, something fierce and almost tender. "For you, for him." His jaw tightened. "Always." He disappeared down the stairs. The voices below rose angry, sharp, boots scuffed. Someone cursed. Alina pressed a trembling hand over Tomas's ears and held him tight as her own fear shook her bones. "You got no right, token property owed to Mr. Holt." One of the men barked. Rowan's voice dropped to that cold rumble that felt like distant thunder. "You want to try taking him again? Then step forward. See what happens." A beat of silence. Then fists hit wood. A crash, a grunt. Another crash. Alina shut her eyes, rocking harder. She prayed without words, prayed like breath, prayed with every part of her that had ever known loss. Minutes stretched like hours. Finally, footsteps. Heavy ones. Slow ones. The door opened. Rowan stood there, blood on his knuckles, a tear in his sleeve. But his eyes found Alina immediately, checking her, grounding himself in the sight of her and Tomas. "It's done," he said. "They won't be bothering you tonight." Her breath finally left her. Relief made her knees weak. But Rowan wasn't finished. He stepped closer, voice low, steady, unshakable. "Alina Holt's not done. Not yet. So tomorrow morning, I'm talking you both out of this town." Her lips parted. "Where?" "My place," he said simply. "Deep in the mountains, far from Holt's reach. And you two are staying there. Until this is over." Not a question. A promise. One she wasn't sure she should accept, but one her heart already leaned toward. Dawn broke pale and cold over the town, washing the streets in a gray quiet that felt nearly fragile. Alina stood beside Rowan's towering gelding while he saddled the second horse. One he'd borrowed from the livery, with a single promise and a heavy look that said, "Don't ask questions." Tomas lay bundled in a soft wool sling across her chest, warm and breathing softly. Every so often she pressed her palm over his tiny back just to feel it rise. Just to be sure. Rowan checked the cinch twice, then glanced up at her. "You warm enough?" "Yes," she said, though her voice trembled. She wasn't sure if it was the cold or the fear of what lay ahead. Rowan's eyes softened anyway. "If you get cold later, say something. Don't try to push through." The gentleness in his voice did something strange to her chests, something she wasn't ready to name. They left town quietly, taking the narrow, winding trail along the river, one that avoided Holt's main road and any riders he might have sent searching. The early morning air stung Elena's cheeks, but she kept one hand steady on Tomas while Rowan rode a little ahead, scanning the tree line, the riverbanks, the hills behind them. Every sound, every rustling branch, every loose pebble tumbling down the slope made her pulse stutter. After an hour of climbing, the trail narrowed to a rocky ledge overlooking the valley. Snow glittered in patches. The world felt bigger and emptier than any place she'd ever known. Rowan slowed his horse until he was beside her. "You're doing fine," he murmured. "You say that like I look terrified." "You do." His lips twitched almost a smile. "But you're still moving. That counts." Her breath puffed in a soft laugh. "You're used to this, I guess." He nodded toward the towering pines ahead. "Been living up here 15 years. Quiet keeps a man honest." "What keeps a man lonely?" she asked before she could stop herself. Rowan's jaw tightened, and he looked away toward the mountains. "Same thing." They rode in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable, just heavy with unspoken things. By midday, clouds rolled over the peaks, trailing thin fingers of snow. Rowan led them off the main trail and down a hidden path where the trees thickened into a dark canopy. His horse moved with a surety that told Elena he'd taken this route hundreds of times before. Tomas stirred and whimpered. Elena shifted him, whispering soft, soothing sounds. Rowan glanced back, eyes softening when he saw her rocking him. "He likes the movement," she murmured. "Ever since he was born. Long as he feels someone carrying him, he settles." Rowan's voice came low. "He knows you protect him." She blinked fast, fighting the prickle behind her eyes. "I've tried." "You've done more'n try." He slowed again until they were close enough for her to see the sincerity written across his face. "You're the reason he's still breathing, Elena. Don't talk like you failed him." The kindness in his words was almost too much. She looked away, pretending to adjust the sling, because her heart felt too raw. Another hour passed before Rowan finally said, "We're close." The forest opened suddenly onto a wide clearing, sun breaking through the clouds in pale shafts of gold. Nestled against the base of a mountain stood a sturdy log cabin, large, hand-built, smoke curling from its chimney. A small barn sat off to the side, and a split-rail fence marked the property lines. Elena sucked in a breath. "This is yours." Rowan nodded once, almost embarrassed. "Built it with my own hands." "It's beautiful," she whispered, and meant it. Rowan dismounted, then stepped to her side, offering his hands to help her down. She hesitated only a moment before letting him. His hands were warm despite the cold, strong enough that she felt instantly steadied. Inside, the cabin was surprisingly warm, lit by a stone fireplace. A thick rug covered the floor. Shelves of tools and supplies lined the walls. A well-made bed sat against the far corner, covered in quilts. Rowan cleared his throat. "I'll sleep out by the fire or in the barn. You and the little one take the bed." "No," she said too quickly. "Rowan, you shouldn't sleep in the barn because of us." His jaw flexed. "You're safer where I can get to you quick if something happens." She swallowed. "You really think Holt will follow us this far?" Rowan's eyes darkened, something fierce flickering in their depths. "He tried to take what's yours. What shouldn't ever be taken from any woman." He looked at her, really looked, "and I don't intend to give him a second chance." Elena felt her heartbeat shift, slow and deep and dangerous. "Rowan," she whispered, "why are you doing all this?" His answer came rough and honest. "Because I couldn't ride away. Not from you. Not from him." And suddenly, the mountains felt even bigger, and the quiet between them even louder. The first night in Rowan's cabin should have soothed Elena. Warm fire, thick quilts, the steady rumble of mountain wind outside instead of angry boots and shouting men. But sleep wouldn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Holt's cold smirk, the way he'd reached for her baby, like a man collecting a coin he was owed. Near midnight, Tomas whimpered, and she rose to soothe him. The cabin was dim, but not dark. The fire had burned down to low embers, casting a soft orange glow across the room. She noticed Rowan instantly. He wasn't sleeping. He sat in the wooden chair near the door, rifle leaned across his knees, back straight, eyes fixed on the shadows like he expected danger to crawl out of them. "Rowan," she whispered. His gaze softened when it landed on her. "Didn't mean to wake you. You're keeping watch." He nodded once. "Holt's men are stubborn. I'm worse." Her chest tightened. "Rowan, you need rest. You can't stay awake all night for us." His expression didn't budge. "I can have," she swallowed. "What if they don't come?" His voice dropped, low and certain. "Then I'll still be here, in case they do." She stood there a long moment, Tomas warm against her chest, the firelight painting Rowan in quiet, unwavering strength. Something deep inside hers, something long bruised, slowly unfurled. "Come sit," she whispered. Rowan hesitated. like she'd asked him to cross a line he'd promised himself he wouldn't. But after a heartbeat, he rose and stepped closer, boots silent on the wooden floor. Elena sat on the edge of the bed and shifted Tomas so she could pat the blanket beside her. Just for a little while. He lowered himself awkwardly, as if unused to sitting near another person. The bed dipped under his weight. "You sure?" he murmured. "Yes," she said softly. "I don't want you sitting alone by the door all night." Rowan exhaled through his nose a soft, warm breath that sounded almost like relief. For several minutes, the only sound was Tomas's tiny breaths in the distant wind. Rowan watched the baby with a look she couldn't decipher, part wonder, part protectiveness, part something else entirely. "He's small," Rowan said quietly. "He came early." Elena brushed her fingers over Tomas's cheek. "But he's strong, that he is." Rowan's voice warmed. "Fought to stay with you. That matters." Her throat tightened. "I was so afraid I'd lose him. Every day. Even before Holt." Rowan's big hand curled into a fist on his knee. "He had no right. A man who'd take a child like a sack of grain doesn't deserve to be called a man." Elena studied him, the tension in his jaw, the heat in his eyes. He wasn't just angry for her, he carried the anger like it belonged to him. "Rowan," she whispered, "why does this matter so much to you?" He didn't answer right away. He rubbed a hand over his beard, cleared his throat like the words tasted strange. "Because I know what it's like," he said finally, "to have something precious taken, and to be too late to stop it." She blinked. "Your family?" Rowan nodded, eyes shadowed. "A long time ago, winter storm took my brother while I was out hunting. I thought I'd be quick, thought I'd be back before the snow turned. I wasn't." Elena's heart cracked. "Rowan, I'm so sorry. Don't be." His voice was gravel and regret. "Just means I don't let people I care for end up alone in the fight." She froze. "People I care for." He didn't look at her when he said it, didn't seem to realize he'd said it at all, but the words settled inside her, warm and terrifying. A soft gust of wind rattled the cabin walls. Rowan straightened, instinct sharp. "Elena," he murmured, "someone's out there." Her breath caught. "Holt, maybe, maybe not." Rowan stood, expression going hard. "Get Tomas under the blankets. Stay low." He grabbed his rifle and moved to the window, silent as a shadow. Elena's heart thudded. She tucked the baby close, crouched beside the bed, breath trembling. Rowan peered out for a long moment, then another. Finally, his shoulders loosened. "It's just a deer." Elena sagged in relief. "Thank God." Rowan set his rifle aside and returned to her. He crouched so they were eye level, his hand hovering near her cheek but not touching, like he wasn't sure he had the right. "You're safe here," he said softly. "I swear it." She looked up at him, a mountain of a man with tired eyes and a heart he didn't know how to protect. "Rowan," she whispered, "I believe you." His breath hitched, just barely. It felt like the beginning of something neither of them had dared to imagine. But even in that quiet moment, both of them knew Holt would not let this end peacefully. He would come. He would try to take Tomas again. He would try to take her. And Rowan would fight the whole mountain range before he let that happen. The storm wasn't over. It had only just reached the peaks.